Welcome to Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast, the podcast that is here to unveil, explore the transformative power of EMDR therapy. We are here on a beautiful mission to support amazing clinicians, both new and seasoned, with those critical conversations, resources about EMDR therapy and how to build your amazing private practice. Friends, I am one of your hosts. I'm Tamera J. Brown, and I have with me my beautiful co-host, Kathy Couch, and our amazing guest, Dr. Nicole from the Center of Healing and Development. And folks, we are here because we're thrilled to have an amazing conversation with Dr. Nicole about racial trauma and ways that we can support our communities in navigating through some of the tough things that relate to racial trauma. And so, Kathy, I want to pass the mic over to you before we give it to our guests and just have you say a few things before we get started today.
Yeah, so I'm Kathy Couch. I am an EMDR consultant in a private practice with Rewired 360, where we train and teach therapists how to become EMDR consultants and certified therapists and trainers. And I'm certified in grief, death, dying, and bereavement. So that's the population I work with. I have a small private practice. I have twin boys that are 4 and a 7-year-old. So I'm busy doing that as well. And we host this podcast every week so that we can spread the love of the community. I also am an advocate of the BIPOC community. And for our listeners, we have a BIPOC scholarship to become EMDR certified or EMDR consultant. So visit my website at www.rewired360.com. We really believe in changing those historic patterns of oppression and systemic racism. And so that's the intent of the scholarship. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Monteiro, and we'll just kind of start our discussion today. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe your history and your practice and kind of how you got to where you are?
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the podcast and the other work that you do. I think it's vitally important. I am Dr. Nicole Monteiro. I'm a licensed psychologist and also a certified life coach. I am also a professor, a tenured professor in the master's program in clinical and counseling psychology at Chestnut Hill College here in Philadelphia. And so, when you all talk about training and, training the next generation and supporting therapists at the different stages of their career, I think we need so much of that, right? Like we have to pass down the knowledge and also be open to what the next generation of clinicians has to say and offer. And I have a private practice, as you said, Tamera, in Philadelphia called the Center for Healing and Development. And I work with, people from all walks of life, but I tend to really work with sort of people who are successful, who would be deemed successful high achievers, but who may have a history of trauma, of other sort of generational patterns that really impact their well-being and their, just their ability to thrive and to just really feel connected. And so I'm passionate about EMDR, and I'm also passionate about different modalities for helping people to just live a better quality of life, and especially BIPOC communities who we know have traditionally not had access to mental health care or the best mental health care or what's most innovative, right? Like usually it's the breadcrumbs that marginalized communities get. And so I'm really excited to talk with you all.
Well,
that was really the intent of the scholarship as well, so that we can help EMDR clinicians get, those breadcrumbs. They can become more integrated, and I love, that description. I think, Tamara, you were gonna have a comment there.
I just think it's beautiful, and I'm so grateful that we're here. I think it's just a needed conversation, and so I'm grateful that we've made space and that Dr. Nicole has said yes to being here today. And it brings me to my most first delicious question, which is, Dr. Nicole, can you define for us and our listening audience what racial trauma is, and then how does it differ from other forms of, like childhood trauma, things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially as, you know, as a whole society, we've become more aware of terms like trauma. And
Mhm.
we're, although not everybody, but we're more in a space of being trauma informed and trauma aware, and aware of the fact that events, no matter how long ago they happened, can have a very strong, intense impact on how we feel, on our psychological functioning, our physical functioning. So anything that sort of overwhelms our capacity to cope and to bounce back can be seen as traumatic. That's what I tell my students in the simplest form. And so when we think about racial trauma, we think automatically we're going to be talking about generational trauma,
Mhm.
because race and racism are generational experiences where communities, groups of people, so it's a collective, right? It's not just a one-to-one thing. That racism is impactful because there have been groups of people that have been marginalized. And that, what we're understanding is like ongoing, generational, systemic,
Yes.
institutional, all of those big terms, being marginalized in those ways has an impact not only on things that like sociologists would talk about, like, where you live and your income and access to medical care, but your actual psychological, emotional, holistic functioning.
Mhm.
And so racial trauma is like giving language to the fact that there are generational patterns and ways that communities, people of color, Black people, when we talk about it in the US, have been marginalized through racism and historical racism that are negatively impacting their psychological and emotional well-being and physical, right? But I know we're in the therapy space.
Yeah.
I, it's huge, and I know that many people, um, especially people of color can relate, like, yes, right? Somebody's giving language and at least somebody's sharing and talking about it in this way. Um, can you give us like a real life example of what this would look like, maybe for a African American woman who is experiencing racial trauma, just to paint a picture that everybody,
Yes,
we can be
yes.
really clear about what this looks like. Just paint a picture for us, and then what it would look like as an impact on her mental health.
Yes. So a lot of us have heard about microaggressions, right? These kind of little
Yeah.
digs that of like questioning your worth or your value. It could be comments, it could be looks, right? The reason that microaggressions um, hurt or have a negative impact is because they're based on things like racial stereotypes. So if a woman, a Black woman, for example, is in the workplace and she wants to ask a question or give her opinion, there's a lingering stereotype of something called an angry Black woman.
Mm.
So she may be subjected to microaggressions, statements, stares, questioning her competence, all of these things that can happen in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. And that has a whole impact on her confidence, her feeling an imposter syndrome, questioning herself, her actions, whether she's going to speak up or not. And then that could create a whole, well, now you're not contributing to the team, right? So these stereotypes and how people respond to her based on these racial stereotypes can really affect her because she's under
Mhm.
a cloud of microaggressions or comments or stereotypes that are directed at her. And the really difficult thing about like a lot of the modern racial trauma, so people might say, well, it's not like, 50 years ago, like schools are integrated. The work, we have equal opportunity, protections and anti-discrimination. That is why these microaggressions are so dangerous, because it's almost like a form of, we've all heard of gaslighting. So because it's not always so in your face, the person will question him or herself. They will wonder, is it just me? And there's so much research and evidence that like these little ways of doubting yourself, of questioning, of being the target of microaggressions and stereotypes, it has a cumulative effect. It builds up. So it then affects your emotional well-being, your confidence, your self-esteem. It affects how you interact with people. It it affects your mood, right? So, in all of this, from things that a lot of times people may deny, like, oh, we didn't do anything. Like, what's the problem? We're an open workplace, right? So, racial trauma, especially modern racial trauma, oftentimes looks like microaggressions. It looks like putting stereotypes onto people, racial stereotypes. It also can look like, another example, Tamara, is the actual secondary or vicarious trauma of events happening in society. So when we see things like police brutality or, the internet now, how many Black men have we seen on TV shot, by police or other circumstances? And then when you're a person of color and you're watching that, you may identify with it. You may have your own fears for yourself or your people in your family. And so exposure to that becomes another form of trauma where you're constantly reliving the fact that people who look like you are discriminated against in society. So those are kind of two
You're
examples.
saying a lot of really important things. I think the one thing, I'm just gonna kind of go through these comments here. The generational trauma is really, I really think that that is, historic, because those stories that you bring forward into the present self from historical narratives. I did a study abroad in West Africa. We went to one of the slave castles where they had slaves and ships, and it was this experience where I could see they just had this little hole down in this cell where they would get food, and it just, these experiences where we bring these forward shape people. And, those historic, like the colonization and those kinds of things, people now with privilege don't have those conversations at home, right? In general.
Yeah.
And so those generational patterns really can be affected of the psyche. And I want to talk about these microaggressions as well, because what you're saying in the historic presence, right? It was overt, like this is the white bathroom, this is the black bathroom, and now it's transformed to where it's this subtle psychological effect. So I think that just is so powerful. I wanted to share Dr. Norma Day Vines talks about how to address microaggressions or racial issues during conversations. And Tamera and I, had these conversations, I talked to her, I said, hey, listen, being a white woman from the actual North and being a Black woman from the actual South, how do we bridge that gap and forge these conversations to where we can bring them forward to the forefront of the mind, so that we can talk about how do those patterns affect our relationship? What do you need in the therapeutic relationship to be able to have those discussions? Because if you're in a therapy session and you're not addressing that or talking about that, you're missing the boat, right?
Yeah.
Of what you're saying.
You're not open. And you're not, a lot of times, your clients are not going to tell you. And they're
Right.
not gonna, right? It's not their responsibility to make you aware of,
Right.
like, in your training.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have such a deep appreciation, Dr. Monterio, for many reasons. Number one, because in the Journey Through the Eyes podcast, one of the things that we have, one of the values that we've set forth was to be natural, organic, transparent, and human. So that both clinicians, whether they're seasoned or new, and then just for our listening audience on a human level, recognizes that they're not alone and that we're just as human as they are going through things, even though we're on the journey we're on. But it resonates for me because I landed in the EMDR community because of what I now have language for as a microaggression. And I loved how at the start of our conversation, if I can rewind it, and you sharing your passion about helping high achievers
Right.
and the value that clinical supervisors and leaders can bring to the table. And I, as a LPC intern, I was surrounded by leaders who didn't look like me. And I was, and then because of my own background, coming from poverty into these settings, feeling like I don't even know if I have a right to be here. And I asked a leader who was a supervisor a question about EMDR, and she basically told me it was too much for me and that I needed to continue to stay with the free trainings the company offers.
Wow.
And there was no one I felt safe enough. I just knew in my body it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
That's all I knew.
Yeah. I have
But then,
chills listening to you
yeah,
tell that.
and
So,
I did not have, and then me, like many other women of color who may be able to say this, so I'm just going to speak it. I did exactly what you said. I held it in and I didn't talk about it. I minimized it really. It wasn't until I got into the Rewired 360 community and me and Kathy started that I really started speaking about it because I realized how much it shaped me because but I did the opposite. I was curious. I've always been a very curious girl. And then I'm also very determined, coming up in the streets of the hood, you get a kind of grind about you that, and I've had that. And that is how I ended up reaching for EMDR and becoming EMDR trained therapist because of a situation and experience like that. And so I want to say that I want to ask you, Dr. Monteiro, I mean, it's beautiful, it's so delicious, right? Right. That let's take that example that you gave for that woman and how she's experiencing a microaggression, a form of racial trauma at work. How will that then, and how can that possibly show up at home, either in her marriage or just in her family relationships, to see that trickle down, or if there is one?
Yes, that is such a great question because I do so much, even with coaching with women around having more balance and ease within themselves. So imagine the experience of what you described of having a microaggression thrown at you, not knowing really what it is, but feeling it in your body, feeling how you're shutting down, how you're feeling less confident. And then when you don't have a place or space to process that, you hold that in. And we know for a lot of women, like Black women, they're expected to be strong. Everything is okay. Everything, especially a high achiever, everything is perfect. You take that home and you start to crack. You
Mm,
either are not communicating because you don't know the language or the words, or maybe you feel ashamed. And we all know what happens in relationships, whether it's romantic or otherwise, when you're not communicating. You start, maybe getting irritable. You start lashing out. Maybe you start shutting down. Start feeling depressed to where you just want to isolate from people. And because I think language is so important. When you don't know, when someone says, "Oh, you EMDR, no, that's too complicated for you." You don't necessarily have the language to
Yeah.
articulate what that has done to you.
Right.
And that's where it's the problem. It comes out at home because you don't know even how to express to the people closest to you what's happening.
I want
mm,
to ask you too, like, let's just say this patient comes in for the first session, let's just say you just met her. When in your work with racial trauma, how much education do you have to do on the awareness of these trends? Or are they more in the forefront of their mind, or are they even sort of, when you're pointing these out, they're more unconscious of these symptoms?
I think it depends on the client. Some are very aware. They've immersed themselves. They might even be in the DE&I space or whatever. For others, they're not. They're at a different level of like they've internalized it. And so I'm really focused more on normalizing their reaction to it and encouraging reflection and not self-blame. So, and that's a lot of times that's not even the main thing that people are coming for, right? They might say, "Oh, I'm here because my husband and I are arguing," or something like that.
Right, yeah, those communication
Right?
problems at home, right?
Yeah. So I
Mhm.
try not to, just hone in like, oh, that's the main people. Like you said, we're multifaceted.
And the
So
foundation of
yeah.
pathology, right, with this is different, right? Because you have
Mhm.
all these things impacting this patient that, might not um, impact another patient. I wanted to ask you, do you provide EMDR therapy?
Yes.
So I
Yes.
wanted to ask you, let's work on this from a clinical perspective. So you come in and you have this racial trauma. Can you walk us through maybe how you set up the target or a sample target for reprocessing and desensitization, and talk us through that process as an EMDR clinician?
So it's really around what is causing them significant distress.
Mhm.
And so and it's really helping the client to like hone in and feel comfortable. A lot of times we know with clients, they will downplay their
Mhm.
traumas. So it's like, well, that could no, it had to be something like sexual abuse or something. They will downplay
Yep.
that thing. And you have to really hone in to identify that as a target. So when I start hearing language around like not good enough or inadequate or that internalized self-blame, like, well, what did I do? And I'm always in these situations, like where you start to see they're talking about a pattern where it's self-blame and things like that. And so I'll dig a little bit and we'll try to identify what was a time when they felt like that, right? And usually that one situation, like you said, Tamera, like that something like that will be brought up. And so one of the keys is to validate that that is a target that has caused them distress. And then we'll just go through like really, I do EMDR in two ways, with existing clients and as an adjunct for clients who are working with therapists already.
Okay.
So, which I like the latter a lot, right? Because
Yeah.
I could just really hone in because they already
Right.
have a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
So we'll just really kind of dig in to get the details of what happened. And I find that once I give them permission to identify that as an overwhelming, distressing, traumatic situation, then it's kind of, I don't want to say easy, but like it just unfolds from there. Like, well, what happened? How do you
I think
visualize that?
sometimes the big T traumas are cloaked as small T traumas. That's basically what's happening in the microaggressions, right? The big
Mhm.
T traumas are cloaked in this way. It's like, oh, that didn't really happen. That's just
Yeah.
what Vince commented on earlier. That didn't really happen. That's not what we meant. And these big T traumas are minimized, right? So they come into treatment and they just think, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal because they're socialized, right?
Yeah. They think it's not a big deal. Exactly. And then that's almost more than half of the healing. Once you give them permission,
Right.
and then from there, it's like, oh, I can process this. Like, wow, this really
Mhm.
has been affecting me. I can't
Mhm.
sleep at night. Like every time I'm triggered, every time somebody kind of implies that I'm not good enough or smart enough, I'm ready to just snap. And then they start really realizing all of these ways that um, it's impacting them currently.
So let's
Mhm.
take this forward. This is a little scenario thing I like. So take this forward. Let's say you walk her through EMDR. She unpacks the knapsack. She releases the trauma. Now, talk us through the presentation back at the staff meeting. What do you see her doing there that could be different, or how would she be, or how would
Mhm.
she feel about herself post treatment?
Well, I think one of the things is she has an awareness to where she doesn't internalize it.
Mhm.
And then she's able to pause and determine in a meeting, for example, where opinions are asked, or maybe it's one of those tough conversations, right? A staff meeting. She's able to pause and determine for herself what is strategically and just authentically best for her versus reacting. A
Mhm.
reaction would either be shutting down or it would be going so hard that it almost reinforces the stereotypes, and then it's a never ending, like ongoing
Mm-hmm.
cycle. But she's able to pause and determine. And I work with so many women, especially Black women, with this. Sometimes we feel like we have to fight. And sometimes, if that's what you want to do, that's okay, right? But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it feels like you're cornered into having to fight or be the justice warrior, right? And it's almost like, well, other people can carry some of that burden too. And so
Mm-hmm.
she's able to pause and determine, like, in this situation, it's a tough conversation, or they want to know everyone's opinions. Like, how do I want to respond?
And
Mm-hmm.
for the listeners, I want to see them. Maybe you have had EMDR therapy, maybe not. Maybe this is your first introduction to the topic, but I want to kind of walk our listeners through so that you can see the outcome of how you would feel, what the outcome of that racial trauma would be. And you're right, it's not just the African American community's cause, right? So that's why, as an ally or a person that supports the cause, we also need to say in that moment in the staff meeting, who else sticks up for you? What else do you see? What other comments, can be made? And so that can decrease and diffuse that part too. But I think it's really important to see the outcome of, okay, we went to racial trauma therapy, we're working on this. Now what is different about me in the scenario, and how can that look as I move forward in my experience too? Because I mean, let's just be real, community and systems sometimes don't change, but we can do it, the starfish method. They're all starfish on the beach, you pick up one and you can't save them all, but you can save that one. And I like to say partner, but that kind of idea, and help them work that through so they can have a full integrated self without those symptoms.
Yeah, and without the constant being reactive because you're
Mhm.
triggered and that's a part of you. Like,
Mhm.
even I like to use IFS language with clients, just in terms of like valuing the parts that we may have disowned, or the protector behaviors that maybe come out and sometimes aren't so healthy, but honoring why those things are happening for us and bringing awareness so that you're acting more from a place of feeling more in control versus being controlled.
And what
Mm-hmm.
happens in those environments, right? Let's say, the patient number one, the person that hasn't received therapy goes into that meeting, and, they have maybe experienced this dynamic or pattern with people of color or BIPOC community where they do the microaggressions and then they get the frustration, whatever. What happens in that community when person number two arrives, right? And they have to change their narrative, and that subtle change approach to where they're like, okay, what's going on with this now? These tactics aren't working. And so that's how you create a more global systemic change just by treating that person. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Right?
yeah. And you relieve them of the responsibility of
Mhm.
that change. It's just
Right.
that you have changed, and your work was your internal change.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
not responsible, because a lot of these microaggressions are from well-meaning people. I've had them from colleagues and people who were quote unquote so nice. So it's not even that they were like trying to do something, but it doesn't matter because the impact
Right.
is still the same.
Mm-hmm. I love your share on that, because one of the things, you know, the beauty that I love of EMDR, for example, I've been working with a client who, moving through, just, I don't know what we would call it, but the community workplace is predominantly Caucasian, and she's one of few African American representatives there. And her performance at work is under the radar because a lot of the clients, customers they serve, are from African American communities or marginalized people, and she takes time supporting them. And she got a poor rating, and she had to have a meeting with her boss, and she was just, concerned and very afraid to speak up for herself. And so we have been doing EMDR, and some time had come by, but she came to me yesterday and she said, Tamera, you're never going to believe what happened. I said, what? And she said that she had the meeting, and she said, and I paused. And
The pause, right?
Dr. Monterio, and that is part of where I was going, what you said, because she said, I paused, and she said, and I made a choice. She said, because in my body was the need to advocate for the Black people we serve and to speak on their behalf. And she said to me, I felt like if I did not say anything, I would have been abandoning myself and my true needs. So she said she had a hard conversation that was professional, and that her boss celebrated and thanked her and said when they review her calls, they hear the care and the support, and told her that it wasn't a matter of job security, but told her that's why we would never let you go, because of the way you care and support them. But I brought that to mention because in the work we do with EMDR therapy, what I think is beautiful is how clients come out and come through with that language of I paused, and their brain and their body has a new option.
Yeah.
And they're able, just in that, I don't know what it is, if it's a nanosecond or whatever it is, to make a beautiful internal decision, on their own behalf, and it's just so incredible. It's so amazing. What I want to ask is, let's say, because we may have people, clients or even clinicians who are listening, who may be right in the waves or in the waters of what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say, or what would you recommend for someone who is navigating that, and what can they do for themselves that will empower and help them in such a moment?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think being able to name something or to acknowledge something is so powerful, because then you are able to separate yourself from it. And the reason some of these things are so painful is because we take them as being ourself.
Yes. Oh, that's
Our
great.
core self, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not good. I'm not, the language that we
Oh,
hear.
right. Okay, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah,
if you were to
because
say like, mm-hmm.
stand back and like, this isn't about me, this is a larger issue. And like that core and EMDR, the responsibility, place that responsibility back, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that was
It's
great.
not
That's
you.
good.
It's not you.
Yeah.
Just right there. Because I just think about the times in my own life when someone was able to say like, no, that's not. And just even for simple things, like, how when you're in school and you're doing too much. And I remember
Yeah.
one time I was so anxious, and one of my friends a little older was like, you're doing a lot. So, it's normal that you would feel a bit overwhelmed. So try to take some time. That simple thing is like my anxiety went down so much, because she was able to help me to separate all that I was doing from who that I was.
Wow. Yeah. That's
So
so,
I think that was so helpful.
because the identity formation component really is, you have to rework that identity, even like, in your family or the generations, this is who we are. And you also have to embrace that, but also balance it. So it's really can be this identity development can be difficult, right?
Really difficult. Yeah.
You know what I hear too with this, and I mean, which is amazing.
Mhm.
more pointing towards like polyvagal theory, but
Mm.
to have those human moments, because we often walk around and we look like spider webs. Our thoughts, our identity, everything is all meshed up together. And it's hard to tell who we are from what we're going through. We just own it all, right? But when we have those moments of acknowledging and recognizing the humanness of it all for the mind and body and saying, listen, you know, what you're dealing with, what you're walking through is a pretty big deal and it's normal.
Yeah.
It's normal to feel anxious. It's normal to fear that fear. It's normal to feel sad, you know? And I think just that whole part of that helps us to journey back to knowing that even though we're strong, we're powerful, we're brilliant, and we're tough and we're all the things, but at the end of it all, we're still human. And
Yeah.
being strong doesn't make us invincible, It just reminds me of all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so when you like normalizing something for someone is so powerful. And we think, we might kind of like overlook just how powerful that is. Like,
Well, it's
because
funny because like when you're in school and you probably experienced this, you're teaching this, right? You say, so you normalize it and they say, okay, yeah, moving on. What else do we
what
do?
technique do I do?
Right. And so like now, even me as a clinician, like where I can soak things in more and so for the new clinician, just really embrace one small piece, of the whole pie, because when we're in school, we're like this, that, the other. And it's like this normalizing concept we hear a lot, but that's just the juice, that's just
Yeah.
where it needs to be. I also, even where I'm at, in Idaho, we have less diversity, a more Hispanic population here, because we have migrant workers and farm workers. And so we're thinking about how do we support that Hispanic community and the Spanish speaking communities too. And they have an option for bilingual kindergarten. I'm like, that
Oh,
is
great.
cool. And so I'm trying to think about, in my experience, even as therapists, we're traditionally women. We're going to kind of go into gender for a second. And, even males, even my supervisor roles, they were generally males. And so how do we, even as a female in an industry that's predominantly female, still think about like there are powerful women. And if you say that, how do I, in my own narrative, say, oh, I can't go for that job or promotion because, I'm what you had said, the angry, leader, female.
Causing troubles and
Right,
always,
causing troubles. Who do you think you are? So I had to really think about like, that Marianne Williamson quote, who are you not to be? If not you, who? I think that is the mantra I want to put forward as a skill, like if not you, who? And it takes time to get there, right?
yeah.
It takes some conflict and some, grit inside as a seasoned professional to have those discussions, but like we have to, even, in other settings, it's like you look at the board on the wall and who are they? They're all white males. There's nothing wrong with white males, but where is that diversity and culture so you can have those different perspectives in the leadership and on board so they can have that more welcoming space, right? And so
Yeah.
it's just, we see that a lot, and we need to be able to say, yeah, this is what I'm experiencing, and have that in your body and your emotions, right? As we move forward, and just encourage clinicians to acknowledge and what you had said there. Did you have any more comments kind of on what we can do to help those clinicians? Any other strategies?
Um, I think also doing your own work, like, connecting to your own body and understanding how to ground yourself, because you can potentially be triggered by your clients' stories or over identifying or all of these things. So doing your own work, how do you ground yourself? How do you take care of yourself as a clinician? As always, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you have to be able to look at your well-being for the long haul, but like really paying attention to how you're feeling in sessions. What are those bodily sensations? What are those reactions you might be having on a more physical level? And what is that telling you either about, I'm from the training, like we really looked at countertransference, like I don't know if that's, in or out now, but like, what are your reactions telling you about what's happening in the dynamic with you and the client? And usually we have to have hard conversations
Mhm.
with our clients.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that, not that we're confronting them, but that we're saying the unsayable and we're helping them to do
And
it.
that's the intervention that Dr. Norma Devines talks about. Is just, it's not a big deal. Just have the conversation. Don't avoid it. I don't see your color. It's like, it doesn't
Yes.
matter. Have the discussion, because you have this vicarious trauma. We're in this movement, like, to not acknowledge and say, oh, I don't see your color or your gender. It's like, no, no,
What?
no, no. That tells you something about the person you're dealing with. And so to have that, yeah, but it's important that you know. And so
Yeah.
even in the therapeutic relationship, discussing what that means to that person. I had a person who was actually Filipino when I came back and tried that intervention. I had no idea. And we used her food as a resource from her culture to be able to install that sense of safety. Had I not done that and had that conversation, I wouldn't have known. So there's all these little nuggets you can use that we're missing sometimes as well.
When
Mhm.
you're so like, yeah, it's even the moments when they walk in or when you're first getting
Mm,
set up to start the session, those will give you kind of cultural clues and
right.
connection clues. Hmm.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. It just reminds me of just um, the what I want to say, the divinity of compassion. If we can embody compassion and be brave enough to have those conversations, there's so much healing, so much brilliance, just, in the line of work and everything that we're doing, even when helping clients heal and grow and thrive through painful experiences like racial traumas or microaggressions. I'm so grateful we talked about the way EMDR can help and how we can maneuver and do all these beautiful things, taking those bits and pieces of nuggets from a client's stories, but having that compassion, having that self awareness, bringing that presence into the session so that we can really, as you said, hone in, right? To glean from the client's story, not just the tough stuff, but then those resources, those building blocks that they can begin to build a new, stronger foundation for them to stand and to walk on. I just think it's amazing. It's so amazing. Um, I wanted to ask before we end up having a wrap up for today, Dr. Monterio, if you have any books, maybe a book you would recommend for clinicians, both new and seasoned, and maybe a book also for clients, right, that you would recommend that we could read.
Okay. And I have it by my bedstand. It didn't start with you. Um, I'm going to tell you the exact title. It's an amazing book about generational trauma from not just of like just saying it, but like looking at on a cellular level, on like how we carry the traumas of at least 3 generations, how it shows up, and like how to use language to help shift that. And so it has a subtitle. It's called "It Didn't Start with You." Hold on, I'm trying to, and I almost brought it next to me. I think it's great for clients.
You can just send us a link. We can put it in the session notes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
So
it
we,
didn't start with you. It is how inherited trauma, right? Let me get it.
Yeah, by Mark Wyndham or something.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It didn't start with you, how inherited family trauma shapes who we are and how to end the cycle. Mark Wolin, is that
Yes.
the, okay.
Yes.
Mm.
I think that's great for clinicians, but it also has a very clear language for, lay people.
so it's
And
both. Okay.
this book is really good. It's called Self Therapy. This is
Mm,
a great way for this clients or just people who aren't clinicians could read it. It really explains, it says creating wholeness and healing your inner child. using internal family systems. But you don't have to get wrapped up in that internal family systems. It really helps people to understand the ways that their trauma has maybe chipped away at them feeling whole,
Mhm.
and specific ways to identify and heal, either while you're in therapy or even maybe you're in between therapy or you're not in it yet or something like that. It's a really great, I hesitate to say self-help book because I feel like it's so much more than that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I use it with some clients. What else? Yeah. But I didn't know if you wanted something specific to racial trauma, but those are two books that one I'm using now and the other I just finished.
And if you have
Wow.
more, we were
Mhm.
happy to put them in
Okay.
there too. I think, with the inner child work, I think it's so cliche. Oh, go and work on your inner child. And even, I heard that as I was coming up as a therapist, and now, even way before EMDR, now it's like, oh my gosh, that's where it is.
Yeah.
That part, like connecting those parts is just so critical, and so if you're
Mhm.
new and you're hearing that, go work on your inner child or using that actually is one of the most valid interventions you can try.
Mhm.
You have
It's
to,
like it's like if a fitness person says, work on your diet and exercise, people will get mad, like, oh, we've heard that, but that's like,
You
that's what
know,
it is.
I love that. I love that. I mean, Dr. Monterio, you have been a sheer blessing to us, to both. I speak this from, Kathy and I, because I can see her light in her eyes, and to our listening audience. And we hope that we will be able to later this year have you come back, because this conversation, it has like it's got an oak tree branches and things that we can move in, but you brought such a beautiful wealth of wisdom, help,
Yes.
and support for us as clinicians and for the clients and the people who will be listening in. We want to hear from you about where can folks find you? Where can they reach out if they're in the Philadelphia area or just online and want to follow you? We want to hear, where can the folks find you at?
Yeah, so my practice is the Center for Healing and Development. If you're in the Philadelphia or Pennsylvania area, that's chadwellness.com, CHAD wellness.com. If you want to follow me online, I do a lot online in terms of online workshops. I have coaching programs for women around healthy boundaries. You can find out all of that. I have a book around boundaries and relationships. You can go to drnicolemontero.com. So DrNicoleMontero.com. You can sign up for my email list and, that's like a one-stop shop for everything that I'm doing personally, even outside of the practice that you may be a part of, even if you're not in Philadelphia. And if you want to follow me on social media, Instagram, it's I am Dr. Nicole.
I'm
So that's a
amazing. Well, I'm about to fangirl you, as
yeah,
Kathy
me too.
says. I
I
take it. We're about to
know.
fangirl you, so you're gonna have some therapy
I'm
coaching
over here
junkies
laughing
floating
because she
around.
has a cheetah shirt on and I have a cheetah shirt on.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's funny. I was
okay.
like, what am I gonna wear today?
And so we're just so grateful. Thank you to our listening audience. And remember that Journey Through the Eyes is here to inform, inspire, and ignite passion for EMDR, whatever your therapy vibe is. And so, Kathy, I'm going to hand this hot mic over to you, and you take us out. And don't forget to encourage them to subscribe.
Yeah, so just remembering that this work is a communal work. It's not just the community we're treating that's responsible for this. So if you're new, just remember, get active and do the work too. And you can find us at TameraArisePsychotherapy.com. I'm at www.rewired360.com, helping rewire how we learn, lead, and thrive, transforming EMDR clinicians into business owners. So that's my niche, and grief and loss. So we're so thrilled here, Dr. Monteiro. It was awesome having you here. You're a breath of fresh air. We appreciate your leadership and your commitment
Mhm.
here. And
Mhm.
we hope to have you back.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Any last words, anything you want to say before we go?
To the clinicians, what you do is so important. Please take care of yourselves and please, clinicians, we're kind of trained. Like sometimes we can not acknowledge our brilliance, our light, and what we contribute. And it's really life changing. So, a form of self care, I think, is just appreciating all that you do and how vital and how amazing it is.
Mhm.
And also for clients too, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, we thank you all for tuning in, listening. Catch us in the next episode of Journey Through the Eyes, the EMDR podcast, and take care of you. And we will be seeing you soon. Have an amazing day.
Take care. Bye.